At our housewarming, my husband Mistress arrived, dangling his key with a smirk. Still the same locks, darling. Her whisper curled around him as she kissed his jaw. The room froze. I just smiled, poured her whiskey and slid an envelope across the table. Take it all, I murmured. But fair warning, some doors lock forever. Your wife has such lovely taste in home decor. Leah's voice carried from our living room where she stood admiring the family photos on our mantel. I'd just walked in from the kitchen, carrying a tray of appetizers for our housewarming guests, when I heard her comment to Jackson. But it wasn't what she said, it was how she said it, with that knowing smirk, like she was discussing someone else's life. Someone whose husband she'd been sleeping with for months. I froze in the doorway, watching her trace her finger along the edge of our wedding portrait. The same portrait where Jackson and I looked so happy, so completely in love. Now she stood there, bold as brass, commenting on my taste while planning to steal my husband. The tray trembled slightly in my hands, but I managed to keep my composure. Jackson laughed. That easy, comfortable laugh he used to save just for me. Charlotte has always had an eye for making things beautiful, he said, his voice warm with what sounded like genuine affection. If I hadn't known better, I might have thought he was being sweet. But I did know better. I'd heard him whispering those same sweet words to her just 3 days ago. Before we continue with Charlotte's journey of reclaiming her power, if you believe that betrayed wives deserve justice and respect, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women facing similar battles. Now let's see how this unfolds. It had been Tuesday afternoon when I'd come home early from my book club meeting. Margaret had cancelled at the last minute, something about her granddaughter's school play. I'd decided to surprise Jackson with his favorite lasagna, maybe open a bottle of wine and spend a quiet evening together. We hadn't done that in months, and I thought it might help bridge whatever gap had grown between us. The house had been too quiet when I walked in. Jackson's car was in the driveway, but he wasn't in his usual spots. Not in his office reviewing client files, not in the garage tinkering with his motorcycle. I'd climbed the stairs, calling his name softly, thinking maybe he was taking a nap. That's when I'd heard his voice coming from our bedroom, low and intimate. You know I can't just leave her, Leah. The kids, the house, it's complicated. My hand had gripped the banister so tightly I thought the wood might crack. Leah. The same Leah who taught yoga at the community center where Jackson had been working out every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 6 months. The same Leah who'd complimented my dress at the church fundraiser last spring, all smiles and warmth. When has love ever been simple, darling? Her voice had been soft, seductive. Besides, you said yourself she doesn't really see you anymore. When's the last time she looked at you the way I do? I'd pressed myself against the hallway wall, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they'd hear it. 23 years of marriage, and this was how I found out my husband had checked out. Through a doorway, listening to him discuss our private life with his mistress? Charlotte's a good woman, Jackson had said, but his tone was distant, like he was talking about a neighbor he was fond of. She takes care of everything, the kids, the house, even my mother when she was sick. But we've become more like roommates than lovers. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been working so hard to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, keeping everything running smoothly so Jackson could focus on building his law practice. I'd sacrificed my own dreams, put my art degree on hold indefinitely, all to support his ambitions. And somehow my dedication had become boring to him. Now, watching Leah move through my living room like she belonged there, I remembered every word of that conversation. The way Jackson had described missing excitement, craving someone who made him feel young again. The promises he'd made about finding a way to be with her without destroying his reputation or losing access to his children. This is quite the gathering, Leah continued, gesturing around the room filled with our friends and neighbors. You must be so proud of what you've built together. The emphasis on together made my stomach clench. She was mocking me right there in front of everyone, and only I understood the game she was playing. Jackson beamed at her attention, introducing her to the Hendersons from down the street as his friend from the gym. Friend. The word tasted bitter in my mind. I moved through the room mechanically, playing the perfect hostess. I offered drinks, made small talk about the house renovations, complimented Mrs. Chin on her beautiful scarf. All while watching Leah work her way closer to my husband, her hand lingering on his arm when she laughed, her eyes finding his across the room with intimate familiarity. The worst part wasn't even her boldness, It was Jackson's obvious pleasure in it. He was practically glowing with satisfaction, like a man who'd finally found what he'd been searching for. Every smile she gave him, every casual touch, fed something in him that I apparently no longer could. "Charlotte dear, this spinach dip is absolutely divine." Mrs. Patterson's voice snapped me back to the present. "You simply must give me the recipe." "Of course," I managed, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. "It's my grandmother's. She always said the secret was fresh nutmeg." But my attention drifted back to Jackson and Leah. They'd moved toward the windows overlooking our backyard, where Jackson was probably telling her about his plans for the garden. The same plans he'd discussed with me just last week, asking my opinion on where to plant the rose bushes. Now he was sharing those dreams with her as if she'd be the one helping him tend them. I watched him gesture toward the corner where we'd planned to put a swing set for when our daughter Emma brought her future children to visit. Jackson's eyes sparkled as he talked, more animated than I'd seen him in months. Leah nodded eagerly, her hand resting possessively on his forearm. That's when I noticed it, the key. She was holding my husband's house key, the spare from his keychain, twirling it between her fingers like a trophy. The key to the home I'd spent months renovating, the sanctuary I'd created for our family. She had access to everything that was mine. Something cold and sharp settled in my chest. Not grief. I'd already mourned this marriage during those sleepless nights when Jackson came home smelling like her perfume. Not anger either. This was something much more dangerous. This was clarity. I excused myself from the conversation and walked calmly to the kitchen, setting down the empty appetizer tray. My hands were steady now. My mind was crystal clear for the first time in months. Jackson thought he'd found his escape, his second chance at happiness. Leah thought she'd won the prize. Both of them had underestimated the woman they were betraying. I pulled my phone from my purse and opened my contact list. James Morrison, the divorce attorney who'd handled my sister's case last year. I'd programmed his number months ago, during one of those dark 3 a.m. moments when I'd suspected but hadn't yet confirmed Jackson's infidelity. My finger hovered over his name for just a moment before I pressed call. "James? It's Charlotte Manning. I think it's time we had that conversation." "Mrs. Manning, I'm glad you called." James Morrison's voice was steady and reassuring through the phone. "Can you meet me Monday morning? 9 o'clock. I'll be there." I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my purse, my heart racing but my resolve stronger than ever. The next morning, Jackson left for his early client meeting, code for breakfast with Leah at that little bistro on Maple Street. I waited 30 minutes after his car disappeared down our driveway before I began my real work. His home office was my first stop. Jackson had always been meticulous about his legal files, but apparently less careful about hiding his personal secrets. I photographed credit card statements showing charges at restaurants I'd never been to, hotels in neighboring towns during weekends when he claimed to be playing golf with his partners. The paper trail painted a vivid picture of deception. His laptop revealed even more damaging evidence. Email threads between him and Leah stretched back 8 months. Much longer than I'd initially suspected. The early messages were flirtatious, then progressed to explicit planning of their encounters. But what made my blood run cold were the messages where they discussed me. "She's completely clueless," Jackson had written in March. "Charlotte's so wrapped up in her perfect housewife routine, she doesn't notice anything anymore. Sometimes I wonder if she'd even care if she found out." Leah's response was equally cruel. "Poor thing living in her little fantasy world. You deserve so much better than someone who's given up on life." I screenshot every conversation, saved every photo they'd shared, documented every lie Jackson had told me while planning his escapes with her. My hands shook as I worked, not from fear, but from fury at how casually they'd dismissed me, reduced me to nothing more than an obstacle to their happiness. Tuesday afternoon, I followed Jackson to what he told me was a deposition meeting. Instead, he met Leah at Riverside Park, the same place where he'd proposed to me 24 years ago. The irony was lost on him but not on me. I parked across the street with a telephoto lens I'd bought the day before, capturing photos of them holding hands on our bench, kissing under our tree. The photography session yielded more than just evidence. It gave me clarity about Jackson's character. He wasn't just cheating. He was methodically destroying everything sacred about our relationship. Every special place, Every meaningful tradition he was sharing with her and erasing my presence from his life. Wednesday brought an unexpected gift. While Jackson was supposedly in court, our neighbor Mrs. Henderson called me over for coffee. "Charlotte, dear, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything all right between you and Jackson?" My pulse quickened. "Why do you ask?" "Well, I've seen that young woman leaving your house several times when you weren't home. She has her own key, drives a blue sedan. I just assumed she was family, but then I realized I'd never met her at any of your gatherings." Eleanor Henderson was 73, sharp as a tack, and had lived next door for 15 years. Her testimony would be invaluable. I thanked her for her concern and gently encouraged her to write down the dates and times she'd observed this family member visiting. That evening, I installed a discreet recording app on my phone and placed it strategically during Jackson's next call with Leah. Their conversation was a masterclass in arrogance and planning. Jackson discussed his exit strategy, how he planned to gradually distance himself from family obligations, reduce his financial contributions to household expenses, and eventually move in with Leah. "I've already started moving money into the separate account," he told her. "Charlotte never looks at the bank statements anyway. By the time she realizes what's happening, I'll have secured enough to start fresh with you." The financial betrayal cut deeper than the emotional one. While I'd been managing our household budget, carefully saving for our children's college funds and our retirement, Jackson had been systematically draining our joint assets to fund his new life. Bank records showed transfers to an account I'd never known existed, payments to an apartment complex across town where Leah lived. Thursday morning I met with James Morrison. His office overlooked the courthouse where Jackson spent his days advocating for his clients, never imagining that his own wife was building a case against him just blocks away. "This is extensive documentation," James said, reviewing the files I'd brought. "Phone records, financial statements, witness testimony, photographic evidence. Your husband has been remarkably careless. He never thought I'd fight back," I explained. "He sees me as the submissive wife who'll accept whatever scraps of attention he throws my way." James nodded grimly. "That overconfidence is going to cost him dearly. In cases like this, the spouse who documents everything usually wins everything." We spent 2 hours strategizing. James explained how Jackson's affair and financial deception would impact property division, alimony arrangements, and most importantly, child custody. The evidence I'd gathered wasn't just powerful, it was devastating. "There's one more thing," I told James as our meeting concluded. "I want him to know that I know, but not until I'm ready. When I confront him, I want it to be complete destruction, not just a warning shot." Friday evening, Jackson came home late again, his shirt wrinkled and his cologne mixed with Leah's perfume. He kissed my cheek absently and mumbled something about grabbing a quick shower before dinner. As he headed upstairs, his phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at the screen. "Tonight was incredible, my love. I can't wait until we don't have to sneak around anymore." Oh. For the first time in weeks I smiled genuinely. Jackson's confidence in his perfect plan was about to become his complete undoing. The evidence was compiled, the legal strategy was set, and the custody petition was ready to file. He thought he was playing chess while I played checkers. What he didn't realize was that I'd already won the game, he just hadn't seen the final move yet. Soon, very soon, Jackson would discover that underestimating the woman who'd stood beside him for 23 years was the most expensive mistake he'd ever made. The documentation phase was complete. Now it was time for the confrontation he'd never see coming. 2 weeks later I decided it was time. Jackson had grown bolder, staying out later, barely bothering to create believable excuses. He'd even started taking phone calls from Leah in front of me, stepping just outside the kitchen with a casual work call explanation that fooled no one. Our son David was visiting from college for the weekend, and Emma had driven down from her apartment downtown. Family dinner had always been sacred in our house, but Jackson's phone buzzed incessantly throughout the meal. When he finally answered it with a whispered, "Not now, I'll call you back," our children exchanged worried glances. "Dad, is everything okay at the firm?" Emma asked, her voice gentle but probing. Jackson's smile was tight. "Just the usual client emergencies, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." But David wasn't buying it. At 22 he'd inherited his father's sharp instincts and his mother's protective nature. "Mom, you've been really quiet lately. Are you feeling all right?" I met my son's concerned gaze and felt my resolve crystallize. These beautiful, intelligent young adults deserved to know the truth about their father before he destroyed their respect for marriage, for commitment, for the values I'd tried so hard to instill in them. Actually, there's something your father and I need to discuss with both of you, I said calmly, setting down my fork. Jackson's head snapped up, his face draining of color. Charlotte, maybe we should. No, Jackson. They're adults. They deserve honesty. I stood and walked to the kitchen, retrieving the manila envelope from where I'd hidden it behind the coffee canister. My hands were steady as I returned to the dining room. What's that, Mom? Emma's voice was barely a whisper. I placed the envelope on the table between the Sunday roast and the bowl of mashed potatoes. Such an ordinary family dinner, about to become extraordinary in all the wrong ways. Your father has been having an affair for the past 8 months, I said, my voice clear and unwavering. With a woman named Leah Patterson. They've been meeting in hotels, restaurants, even in our home when I wasn't here. He's been moving our money into a secret account to finance his new life with her. The silence that followed was deafening. David's fork clattered against his plate. Emma's face crumpled, then hardened as she looked at her father. Dad. Her voice broke on the word. Jackson's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. This isn't. Charlotte, you don't understand the complexity of. The complexity of what? David's voice was ice cold. Of lying to your family? Of betraying Mom after 23 years. You kids don't understand adult relationships, Jackson stammered, grasping for control. Your mother and I have grown apart. Sometimes people find connections elsewhere when. Stop. Emma's command cut through his excuses. Just stop talking, Dad. You're making it worse. I opened the envelope and spread the contents across the table. Bank statements showing the secret transfers. Photos of Jackson and Leah at restaurants, in parks, entering her apartment building. Text message printouts where they mocked me, planned their future, discussed how to minimize Jackson's financial obligations to his family. Emma picked up one of the photos with shaking hands. This is Riverside Park. Where you proposed to Mom. Emma, sweetheart. Don't call me sweetheart. She slammed the photo down, tears streaming. How could you take her there? How could you ruin that place for Mom? David was reading the text messages, his jaw clenching tighter with each page. You called Mom clueless. You said she was living in a fantasy world. He looked up at Jackson with pure disgust. This woman, this Leah, she's been in our house. She has a key. Jackson finally found his voice, but it came out as defensive anger instead of remorse. You're both acting like children. Marriages end, people move on. Your mother is trying to poison you against me with this dramatic presentation. Dramatic presentation? I laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet room. Jackson, this is evidence. For the divorce proceedings. And the custody petition. His face went white. Custody petition? I pulled out the final document, the one James Morrison had filed that morning. Full custody of both children even though they're adults now. Alimony based on your documented financial deception. And 50% of all marital assets, including the retirement account you thought I didn't know about. Emma was staring at her father like she'd never seen him before. You were planning to leave us? All of us. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. David stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. It's exactly that simple. You chose someone else over your family. Over Mom, who supported your career for decades. Over us. Jackson's phone buzzed again. Leah's name flashed on the screen. Without thinking, he answered it. Not now, Leah, I'm dealing with. He caught himself, but it was too late. Oh my God, Emma breathed. She's calling you during family dinner. Even now, even after Mom just exposed everything, you're still prioritizing her. David snatched the phone from his father's hand. Hello, Leah. This is Jackson's son. Yeah, the one he was planning to abandon for you. I just wanted to let you know that my mother has filed for divorce and you're about to be a very expensive mistake. He ended the call and set the phone on the table with deliberate calm. Jackson lunged for the phone, his composure finally cracking completely. You had no right. I had every right. David's voice was deadly quiet. She destroyed my parents' marriage. She gets to know there are consequences. The room fell silent except for Emma's quiet crying. She was holding another photo. One of Jackson and Leah kissing on our front porch, the same porch where she'd taken prom pictures just 4 years ago. "I can't even look at you right now," she whispered to her father. "I need to leave." As Emma gathered her purse and keys, Jackson finally seemed to grasp the magnitude of what he'd lost. "Please, Emma, David, don't let this destroy our relationship. I'm still your father." David paused at the doorway. "No, Dad. You are our father. Now you're just the man who broke our mother's heart and taught us that promises don't mean anything." The front door closed behind them with a finality that echoed through the house. Jackson and I sat in the ruins of our family dinner, 23 years of marriage reduced to legal documents and bitter truths scattered across the table like wreckage. "This isn't over, Charlotte," he said finally. I looked at the man I'd once loved more than life itself. "Yes, Jackson. It is." The morning after our family dinner confrontation, Jackson was gone. His clothes, his personal belongings, even his favorite coffee mug, all disappeared overnight like he'd never existed in our home. He left behind only a hastily scrawled note on the kitchen counter. "I'll be staying at the Marriott downtown until we can work this out civilly." Civilly. The man who'd decimated our marriage with lies and financial theft wanted to handle things civilly. By noon, a courier delivered documents from Hartwell, Briggs and Associates, the most expensive divorce firm in the city. Jackson wasn't just hiring a lawyer, he was assembling an army. The papers demanded joint custody of all minor children and 50-50 asset division, conveniently ignoring the secret bank account and 8 months of documented adultery. I called James Morrison immediately. "They're trying to steamroll us before we can present our evidence properly." "Let them try," James replied calmly. "Expensive lawyers can't rewrite facts, Charlotte. We have documentation they can't dispute." The first hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, Jackson launched what I can only describe as a charm offensive. He called Emma and David daily, painting himself as the victim of my vindictive overreaction. He sent flowers to my office with notes about working through this difficult time together. He even had the audacity to suggest marriage counseling through his attorney. But his biggest mistake was involving Leah in his legal strategy. 2 days before our first court appearance, I received a call from Emma. "Mom, you need to see something. Can you meet me at that coffee shop on 5th Street?" When I arrived, Emma was sitting in a corner booth with her laptop open, her face pale with anger. "Dad's been posting on social media," she said, turning the screen toward me. Jackson's Facebook page, which had been dormant for months, suddenly featured a series of carefully curated posts. Photos of him and Leah at upscale restaurants, hiking trails, cultural events, all time-stamped from the past week. But what made my blood boil were the captions. "Starting fresh with someone who truly appreciates life's adventures. Sometimes you have to choose happiness over settling. Grateful for second chances and new beginnings." Each post was a calculated slap in the face, designed to present their relationship as a healthy new start rather than the result of months of lying and betrayal. But Emma had noticed something I initially missed. "Look at the dates, Mom. He's been posting these every day since the family dinner. But look at this one." She pointed to a photo of Jackson and Leah at a wine tasting. "This was taken 6 months ago. I recognize the outfit she's wearing from the housewarming party." He's backdating posts to make it look like their relationship started after he left, not before. My daughter's sharp observation had just handed us another piece of evidence. Jackson's attempt to rewrite history on social media would backfire spectacularly in court. The first hearing was brutal. Jackson's lead attorney, Marcus Hartwell, was everything I'd expected. Silver-haired, commanding presence, expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. He presented Jackson as a devoted father who'd made a difficult decision to leave an emotionally distant marriage. "My client recognizes that marriages sometimes end," Hartwell announced to the judge. "But his commitment to his children has never wavered. He's seeking joint custody and fair asset division, nothing more." When it was James's turn, he calmly presented our evidence chronologically. Bank statements showing the secret transfers starting 8 months before Jackson left. Text messages between Jackson and Leah discussing their future together, while Jackson was still living in our family home. Photos of them together at locations where Jackson had claimed to be attending work functions. But the most damaging evidence was Jackson's own social media manipulation. James displayed the screenshots Emma had captured, showing the original timestamps versus the posted dates. Your Honor, Mr. Manning isn't just rewriting his relationship timeline. He's actively deceiving the court about when this affair began, James stated. This demonstrates a pattern of calculated dishonesty that extends beyond marital infidelity into potential fraud. I watched Jackson's face crumble as his own attorney shot him a furious look. Hartwell clearly hadn't known about the social media posts, and his client's deception had just undermined their entire strategy. Judge Patricia Hawkins was a stern woman in her 60s who'd seen every possible divorce scenario in her 20-year career. She studied the evidence for what felt like an eternity before speaking. Mr. Manning, I'm troubled by these discrepancies in your timeline. More concerning is the apparent attempt to mislead this court about the nature and duration of your extramarital relationship. Jackson's second attorney, a younger woman named Rebecca Chase, tried to salvage the situation. Your Honor, my client's social media posts were simply poor judgment during an emotional time. Counselor, Judge Hawkins interrupted, poor judgment is posting unflattering photos of your ex. This appears to be deliberate deception designed to influence these proceedings. The hearing was adjourned with a stern warning to Jackson about providing accurate information to the court. As we left the courthouse, I could hear Hartwell's angry whispers to his client about undisclosed information and compromised strategy. But Jackson wasn't finished fighting dirty. 2 weeks later, I received notice that he was challenging my fitness as a parent, claiming I'd emotionally manipulated our children against him and was using them as weapons in our divorce. The accusation was so outrageous that even James seemed shocked. He's desperate, he told me. This kind of counterattack usually backfires, but we need to be prepared for him to drag this out as long as possible. Jackson's desperation became evident during the second hearing when he took the stand himself. Under cross-examination, James methodically walked him through every lie, every secret meeting, every financial deception. Mr. Manning, you testified that you love your children above all else. Yet you moved nearly $40,000 from their college fund to finance your relationship with Ms. Patterson. How do you reconcile those two statements? Jackson's answer was a masterclass in deflection and self-pity. I was emotionally confused. My marriage had been dead for years. I made some financial decisions I regret, but that doesn't make me a bad father. Dead for years. James pressed. Yet you and Mrs. Manning attended couples counseling just 18 months ago, renewed your wedding vows on your 20th anniversary, and purchased a new home together last year. Which version is the truth, Mr. Manning? The courtroom was silent except for the court reporters clicking keys. Jackson had been caught in another lie and everyone could see it. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Henderson, our elderly neighbor, took the stand as a character witness. Her testimony about Jackson's secret visits from Leah was damaging enough, but then she added a detail that stunned everyone. The young woman wasn't just visiting, Mrs. Henderson said in her clear, precise voice. She was moving things in. Clothes, furniture, personal items. It appeared she was preparing to live there permanently, even while Mrs. Manning was still in residence. Jackson had been planning to move Leah into our family home while I was still living there. The audacity of it left even his own attorneys speechless. When Judge Hawkins delivered her ruling 2 days later, Jackson sat beside his legal team looking like a broken man. Full custody to me. The house, the cars, and 70% of all marital assets. Jackson would pay substantial alimony and child support, even though our children were adults. Mr. Manning, the judge concluded, your pattern of deception, financial fraud, and disregard for your family's welfare has convinced this court that granting you shared custody would not serve anyone's best interests. As I walked out of that courthouse, James beside me carrying boxes of evidence that had secured my victory, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Complete peace. Jackson had gambled everything on his ability to charm and manipulate his way through the legal system. He'd lost it all. 3 months after the final court ruling, I was organizing Jackson's remaining belongings from the garage when Emma called with news that would have been shocking if I hadn't already witnessed Jackson's complete collapse. Mom, you'll never believe what David found out from his friend Marcus at the law school, Emma said, her voice carrying a mix of vindication and pity. Jackson got fired from his firm. I set down the box of his old law books and stepped into the afternoon sunlight. Fired. Apparently, the senior partners held an emergency meeting last week. Marcus's dad works there. He said they couldn't risk having Jackson's name associated with the firm anymore. Too many high-profile clients were asking questions about his moral character after the divorce proceedings became public record. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jackson had always prided himself on his reputation, his standing in the legal community. Now that very community had rejected him as a liability. But the real surprise came 2 days later when Mrs. Henderson knocked on my door with her afternoon tea and a piece of gossip that even she seemed reluctant to share. "Charlotte dear, I hope you don't mind my mentioning this, but I thought you should know. That young woman Leah, she came by yesterday looking for Jackson. I invited Eleanor in, curious despite myself. What did she want?" Eleanor settled into my kitchen chair with a sigh. Well, she looked terrible to be honest. Hair unwashed, dark circles under her eyes. She was practically begging to know where Jackson had moved. Said she'd been trying to reach him for weeks but his phone was disconnected. The mental image of Leah, once so confident and polished, reduced to showing up at my doorstep desperate for information about Jackson, was almost pitiable. Almost. "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that I had no idea where he'd gone. But Charlotte, the poor thing looked like she hadn't eaten in days. I offered her a glass of water and she just broke down crying right there on my porch." Eleanor's compassionate nature meant she felt sorry for everyone, even homewreckers. But her next words revealed just how far Leah had fallen. She kept saying something about losing her job, about how everyone at the yoga studio blamed her for what happened. Apparently, some of the other instructors' husbands attend Jackson's firm, or used to anyway, and word got around about the affair. The yoga studio where Leah taught had been her sanctuary, the place where she'd built her identity as a wellness guru and spiritual guide. Now even that had been stripped away by the consequences of her choices. A week later, I discovered just how complete Leah's social exile had become when I ran into Sarah Mitchell at the grocery store. Sarah had been friends with Leah since college and I'd seen them together countless times at community events. "Charlotte, I want you to know how sorry I am about everything," Sarah said, her voice heavy with guilt. "I had no idea Leah was involved with Jackson. If I'd known, I would have said something." "It's not your responsibility, Sarah. Leah made her choices." Sarah nodded, but I could see she was struggling with something. "The thing is, she called me last month asking if she could stay with my family for a while. Said she was having financial difficulties and needed a place to regroup. And I told her no." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "I couldn't risk my marriage, my children's stability, for someone who had so little regard for other people's families. But I feel terrible about it." The conversation revealed the extent of Leah's isolation. When you're the other woman, you discover quickly that few people want to harbor someone who's proven she can't be trusted around marriages. 2 weeks later, I learned that Leah's isolation wasn't just social, it was geographical. David's girlfriend worked at the post office and mentioned that Leah had filed a forwarding address to Phoenix, Arizona. "She's gone." I asked David when he called to tell me. "Packed up and left town last weekend apparently. Her landlord said she broke her lease early, lost her deposit. Word is she couldn't find work anywhere in the city after the yoga studio let her go. Phoenix. A place where no one knew her story, where she could start over without the weight of being the woman who destroyed the Manning family. But I wondered if geographical distance could really outrun the person you'd become. The most unexpected update came from Jackson himself, though I only learned about it through Emma. He'd called our daughter in what she described as a pathetic state, rambling about how Leah had abandoned him when things got difficult. "He actually had the nerve to sound surprised, Mom," Emma told me during our weekly lunch. "Like he couldn't understand why someone who was willing to break up a marriage might not stick around when the situation became inconvenient for her." Jackson had apparently spent weeks trying to track down Leah, even hiring a private investigator to find her new address in Phoenix. When he finally reached her, she refused to see him or even speak with him on the phone. "He kept saying she owed him an explanation," Emma continued, shaking her head. "The man who spent 8 months lying to his family thinks someone owes him honesty." The irony is incredible. But perhaps the most telling detail came from David, who'd maintained sporadic contact with his father out of what he called morbid curiosity. "Dad's living in a studio apartment downtown," David reported. "1 room, hot plate, shared bathroom down the hall. He asked if he could borrow money for a deposit on a better place. What did you tell him? The same thing Leah apparently told him. No. David's voice was matter-of-fact. He made his choices. Now he gets to live with them. 6 months after my victory in court, I received one final piece of information about Leah's fate. A former colleague from the yoga studio called to tell me that Leah had tried to get her job back, claiming the whole affair had been a misunderstanding and that she'd been manipulated by an older man. Can you believe the nerve? The instructor asked. She actually tried to paint herself as the victim, like Jackson somehow forced her to wreck his marriage. But the yoga studio wasn't buying her revised narrative. They'd already replaced her with someone whose personal life didn't come with scandal and community backlash. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Leah's greatest punishment wasn't the loss of her job or even her exile from our city. It was the loss of her identity as someone special, someone worth destroying a family for. She'd convinced herself that Jackson's attention meant she was extraordinary, that their love was worth any cost. Now she was just another woman who'd made terrible choices, alone in a city where no one knew her name or cared about her story. Standing in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd made that first call to James Morrison, I felt something I hadn't expected: complete indifference. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just the peaceful absence of any feeling about Leah at all. She'd become what she'd always been, irrelevant to my life. I was free to move forward, to build something new on the foundation of my own strength rather than on the ruins of Jackson's betrayal. The woman who'd once threatened to steal my husband was now just a cautionary tale, a reminder that actions have consequences and that some doors once closed never open again. My children were proud of me. My friends respected my courage. My future was my own. The mistress had fallen, but I had risen. If this story of Charlotte's ultimate victory had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Charlotte handed Jackson that envelope at the family dinner, watching his face crumble as his children discovered the truth. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.